Okay, looks like it's right on 5:30, our local time here in Melbourne. So I think it's time to kick things off. First of all, I just want to welcome everyone. It's great to see a lot of people have already joined. Looks like we're up to 35 people now, which is great. And looks like we've got a fair representation globally, which is fantastic. Not only just in Melbourne, but a lot of people from across Australia, including Sydney, and then also outside of Australia as well. Looks like we've got some representation from India, Poland, Canada as well, which is great to see. How far this reach can go, especially when we're working in a virtual environment. So we've got a jam-packed agenda today, and there'll be a lot that we'll run through. First of all, I just want a bit of housekeeping, I guess. We will use the chat function to ask questions and make comments throughout the meetup. And a little bit later on, we'll be doing a quiz for a little bit of fun using Kahoot. So if you haven't used Kahoot before, we'll talk you through the instructions around that. It's pretty simple. If you've got a mobile device, it's probably the easiest way to do it. And yeah, we'll talk you through that a little bit later. But the important thing to note is that some of the quiz questions will be related to the content today. So we've got some great speakers lined up. We've got some great material to share with the community, which is fantastic. But my recommendation is to pay attention because that'll help you get the answers correct. And there are prizes to be won, which is always great. Okay. So yeah, a little bit of fun later on in the piece. So by ways of introduction, for those of you who are either new to the MuleSoft Meetup in Melbourne or who I haven't met before, I'd like to introduce myself. My name's Adam Bond. I'm a lead solution engineer here in Melbourne for MuleSoft. Been at MuleSoft coming up to 2 years now, but yeah, have an extensive background in the integration and API space. And I'm also joined by as many of you will already know, Daniel Soffner. Daniel, I might just get you to introduce yourself, if you don't mind.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, I'm Daniel Soffner, also based in Melbourne. Work for MuleSoft here in Melbourne as a strategic technical architect in the customer success team. Been with the company for about 1.5 years as well. And really happy to have you all on board tonight.
Fantastic. Thanks, Daniel. So yeah, we'll be running the meetup today. I'm obviously hosting this session, but we'll cross to Daniel a little bit later for a talk that he has and some material he's going to cover, which is fantastic. So for those of you who haven't already, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're from as well. As I sort of mentioned, it's really interesting to see just how far this meetup actually reaches. And we always have a pretty wide, a pool of people from across many different geographies, which is fantastic. So yeah, it's not just about us sharing information. It's also about the community that we have, and it's really important to us and means a lot for not only ourselves, but for you to also network with each other, share stories, and experiences using MuleSoft, or also other capabilities or insights and trends that you're seeing as well. So we just really want to build up that community. So yeah, feel free to introduce yourself and make yourself known to all the community out there. Okay, in terms of the agenda today, so I'll sort of be running through a couple of updates, a little bit of housekeeping, more from a MuleSoft perspective. Got some exciting things coming down the pipe from a product and from a company perspective. So I'll give you a bit of an overview of that before we sort of move into a guest speaker today from Intelematics, which is Julian West. So Julian, thank you very much for joining us today. He'll be taking you through deploying MuleSoft with AWS CodeBuild and CodePipeline as well. So yeah, fantastic material, and I'm really excited for Julian to share his insights with you all today. Then we'll be moving over to Daniel, taking you through an update on Runtime Fabric on EKS. So again, I love this capability and the components that we have. So Daniel will talk through that in the second half of the meetup this evening. And last but not least, we'll have that trivia quiz and some giveaways. So, you know, it's worth your while in hanging around, you know, put your knowledge to the test. You know, it's all about speed and accuracy through that trivia. So hopefully, you know, good luck to everyone out there, and hopefully you can come away with a couple of giveaways as well. So I just want to do a bit of a shout out to the online meetup group. So if you go to, you know, meetups.mulesoft.com, there's a link there, online group in English. And these are actually on the Mulesoft site as well. What you'll actually see is a list of the previous sessions that are available. So the recordings are there. You can go to YouTube and actually view the sessions that have already been held. There is a lot of content, a lot of, you know, people from the field, you know, from customer sites, from partners, internal MuleSoft professional services or customer success, or even solution engineers as well, sharing their expertise in this space. So there's a lot of topics, a lot of content, and including some demos as well. So I suggest you get across this and use this, you know, to your advantage as well. It's pretty common for us to do a bit of a shout out to the Friends of Max, which is really a series of short bite-sized videos that are around a wide range of topics across the MuleSoft platform. So I strongly recommend you taking a look at these. There is, you know, I think the list is ever growing. You can actually find this from, you know, our website itself, or alternatively, you can go into YouTube and find the Friends of Max. If you do a bit of a search, you can find that. I'm just going to show you very quickly. I've got it here. So from the videos.mulesoft.com link, we can actually go through and check out a whole bunch of the Friends of Max video series here. Or alternatively, if you go to YouTube as well, there is a playlist. So probably the quickest way to easily find it is if you actually go to MuleSoft videos. You'll see that straight away as one of the playlists there, and we've got, you know, 33 videos, all bite-sized content, easily to digest and get across as well. Now, I wanted to do a shout out for Mulesoft Connect. This is, you know, our big event from a MuleSoft perspective. Now, as of last year, we've sort of broken this down because of the growth that we've had in the community globally. This is now regionalized, this event, which is fantastic, because it also means that you get specific content, you know, customer speakers, hearing about what's going on from a, you know, JPAC perspective, which is fantastic. So this is an upcoming event. It'll be held in May. We'll have the registrations opening soon, so keep an eye out for these. You know, we'll be reaching out to the wider community, letting you know exactly when that date's locked in and how you can actually sign up and get registered for the MuleSoft Connect. You know, I've been across the last couple of these and they're fantastic. You can get a lot of insights across that, and just like I was talking about earlier, the networking side of things is also fantastic. So we'll keep you up to date on that and keep an eye out for what's to come. I just wanted to do I guess a little, you know, a teaser, I guess, or a little bit of a plug here for a new capability that's recently been released, if you're not across it. And, you know, this is really around, you know, targeting the non-sort of technical citizen integrator sort of admin. So sort of looking at either a Salesforce admin, a business user, a BA. It's really opening up the kimono of how you can easily connect your sort of SaaS integrations. And, you know, with our first sort of cab off the rank in terms of the connectors that are available, MuleSoft Composer for Salesforce is a way for you to easily start stitching together that 360-degree view of your customer without really writing any code associated with that. So this is an evolution that we're sort of seeing. It's not taking away anything that we do in Anypoint or the Anypoint platform. That's not going anywhere. That's here to stay. This is really a complementary solution on top of that, aimed at a different audience. So if this is of interest, feel free to reach out. It's recently been made generally available. I think it was start of last week or the week before. So it's hot off the press, and something that's really, well, especially our Salesforce customers are really excited about. So we can actually get on to the exciting and cool stuff with our guest speaker today, and for Daniel a little bit later. I'll look to wrap up here. From an admin perspective, if you're going to do any tweets around the meetup, there's the hashtag there. Please, extend your invitation to other people in your teams, your colleagues, people that you speak with who are across MuleSoft or are interested in MuleSoft, and invite them to come along. We're all about the attendance of you out there, and we want to make it most valuable for you. So the more people we can get along to this, the more impact that we can actually have. And also, just one last thing is to please fill out the survey, provide us feedback. We want to keep improving, keep this relevant, just so you can get the most out of this as we run these meetups. So keep an eye out for that survey and please respond. And last but not least, the next Melbourne meetup will be held in June. So again, keep an eye out for that. Please register, and I look forward to seeing you all there. And with that, I might hand over to Julian, Julian West from Intelematics, his technical lead. I'll let him do a little bit of an introduction to himself. And yeah, take it away, Julian.
Great. I'll just have to share my screen.
No worries. Just let me stop sharing here if I can find me.
Okay. So I'm going to go through a bit of an introduction into CodeBuild and CodePipeline and the ways that you can actually deploy Mule applications with that. So it's not going to be super in depth, but at the end of it, I'll provide you a Git repo that you can have a play around with and look through. So really quickly, I'll talk about myself and Intelematics. So I'm Julian West. I'm the technical lead for integration at Intelematics, and Intelematics really does a lot of really cool vehicle-related and traffic-related and sort of mobility type of work. So yeah, if you have a look through our products, they're quite a suite there, including like fleet tracking and safety and security system, which operate out of vehicles. So our primary cloud is AWS. So we've been working on AWS for a while, and we're really just sort of starting on our MuleSoft journey. So it's been really good to be able to bring across some of the stuff that we've been doing with AWS and try and, yeah, really bring that in. So historically, like a lot of companies, we've been working on Jenkins, and we moved our Jenkins servers from on-premises to the cloud. And then we've sort of been looking around at options and different ways to do it. And for our AWS first mentality, we've decided to go with CodeBuild and CodePipeline. So I'll just quickly go, what are we trying to achieve with this presentation? So I'll just talk about what we're going to cover and how what we're actually going to try and produce out of this, and then talk through a bit of the CodeBuild and CodePipeline considerations when you're actually trying to design something. And then I'll show a bit of CodeBuild and CodePipeline, and you can see it sort of working, which usually brings things together a bit. And then I'll go through a few tips and tricks that we've figured out and share you the Terraform example that I've got. So what we're trying to achieve is we're really trying to get a CI/CD pipeline that suits your business. And like, it's all very well for people to produce CI/CD pipelines that will push things all the way to production. But some businesses, like really large organizations, that kind of doesn't work for their practices. Like, you know, if you're a large betting company or something like that, you really want to be able to segregate these out. So you really need to think about your CI/CD process and what would prevent you moving to the next stage of production. And that might be approvals from certain groups and all that sort of stuff. So these are some benefits that you really can get out of having a nice CI/CD pipeline. So you can really reduce, I really like the bottom one. So reducing access to production is really good because it means people can't make mistakes. If something does go wrong, if somebody does make some kind of mistake, you can actually recover from it super fast. And really probably the most important for me is showing documentation for all of your configurations. So if somebody changes something in production, you know, nobody's touched it. It's just been something that's in your build pipelines. So let's go through what CodeBuild and CodePipeline actually is. It's really a little bit different from things like Jenkins, but similar in some ways. So with CodeBuild and CodePipeline, really the way I think of it starting is from a build job. So CodeBuild is really responsible for running a job. So if I want to perform a certain set of actions, I will run a CodeBuild, and that might take a repository and build that into a jar file, for instance. And it's using a build spec YAML file to do that, which is really quite similar to like a set of bash shell scripts with some additional bits and pieces on the edge. One of the really cool things you can do, because it's so integrated into AWS, is you can pull down all of your secrets and parameters that you might need to use. So like things like your client IDs and client secrets and all that from Secrets Manager, which means that you can keep all of this stuff into the accounts that you're actually working on. So your prod account can be the only place that you can actually pull those secrets down, which is really, really cool. I really like that segregation of where this information is stored. And then when you've produced your asset, so you've produced your jar file, that then gets pushed into S3. So as part of your jobs, you also can produce a cache, which is really handy. So for things like your Maven repository, when you run your job the second time, you can just pull that Maven repository straight out and you don't need to download all of your dependencies all over again. So that side of that cache is really, really cool. And I'll show you a bit later how, in the demo, what sort of improvements that gives you. So CodePipeline is really the orchestration of a whole lot of tasks. So AWS calls them actions. So they could be code build activities, or they could be other things. So I'll go into those in a minute. And our code pipeline then uses S3 to push all of its artifacts into. So all of your assets that are produced through your build using CodePipeline all go into S3. So you do have storage over that. It's a little bit confusing because if a code build job runs, it actually pushes it into the pipeline's S3 if it's part of that pipeline. But look, that's what happens, right, with AWS. So a few things to consider with CodePipeline is all of your steps that you put in start from a source. So they could be one of these Git repositories, so something like Bitbucket or GitHub, or maybe even AWS's code commit if you're using that one. So code commit's just another Git repository in AWS. Or they could also be from another S3 bucket if you wanted to use that. And another way that we use it is grabbing it from an ECR, so a container registry within AWS. And then from those sources, it's able to then run a set of actions, and it's really quite freeform over what those actions are in many ways. So normally for all of our pipelines that we run through with Mule, I do everything through CodeBuild. But technically, there's no reason why you couldn't use something like Jenkins and actually get Jenkins to run those build jobs. I'd probably recommend against it because it would be really difficult to try and figure out how it's all actually pieced together. I'd try and stick everything if you can in CodeBuild. And then there's other types of actions. So there's like deployment actions that you can do as well. So you can deploy to ECS, so the Elastic Container Service, to run your containers if you wanted to. You can also deploy to things like S3, and you can also deploy to CodeDeploy, which essentially manages deployment processes of EC2s, and you can use it for deploying other things that you need to, you know, keep like a blue-green type of environment going. It's pretty neat. So a few considerations when you're starting to work with CodePipeline. There's a lot of flexibility. You could see already that there's a lot of different actions that you can use, and there's even more than that. So you can do things with, you could run a Lambda task. You could also really try and confuse people by running a state machine as well. But look, I think personally, I'd keep this as simple as you can and just run code build jobs unless there's a really, really good reason not to. As I mentioned before, these are all initiated from a source. So if you think about a Git repository, or in terms of a code pipeline, they could be initiated from the last step, sending in a jar file, for instance. Really think about your caching when you run these build jobs, because caching, if you're doing a lot of tests using Munit or whatever, that could take quite a bit of time, and you can really cut down your deployment time by checking your Git shards and making sure if there are no changes, there's really not much point not just picking up the latest jar that you've got. Another consideration is manual approval tasks. So when you've got a code pipeline, you can have a set of stages that your build will stop before and ask for manual intervention. Now, one of the interesting things about CodePipeline is that these stages have a certain lifespan, and I'll get into that a bit later, but it's really easy to have a code pipeline that lasts longer than that, because you need to get correct approvals from your business and then have that expire. So there are other ways to get around that using branches off your Git repositories or something like that. And probably the final consideration is to just remember that you're building these things in the cloud. So you do need to have access to MuleSoft Exchange and any other Maven repos that you may require. So that might even be, well, that will be your runtime environment as well. So you'll need to get access to that. And we use JFrog, and you can set that up so that JFrog will just cache all of those. So you can just then connect straight into those repositories. All right, so this is more of the MuleSoft side of things. This is roughly what it would look like for most MuleSoft deployments, I'd say. So we're starting off with a source. So in this case, it's a Git repository. So if we make any changes to that Git repository, a new pipeline will get kicked off. So even if I go in and make a few small changes that I didn't mean to, if it's on that branch, it will kick off the build. And you can also kick that off manually, but just really keep in mind that you can't. You want to be making sure that all of your changes are kicked off from that Git branch. And then if you make changes to that Git branch, so for instance, if you're part of your release process, make a change to that Git branch, keep in mind that that will actually start off the process again. So you want to try and make no changes if possible to your current branch. So normally we would do a Maven install, which I guess everyone would be doing here. we would probably want to do some kind of a Maven release process to tag your build. And those are pretty standard commands. And then the next set is we want to do some kind of deployment. So that deployment would be using something like a Maven deploy, or you could use Anypoint CLI, which is what I'd prefer to use, because your Maven deploy will actually do a complete build of your jar file again, whereas the Anypoint CLI will just take the jar file you provide and deploy it. It also gives you a few more cool things, which I'll show a bit later. Or you could potentially also deploy using the REST APIs. There's probably not much reason to use those REST APIs because I believe that Anypoint CLI is built on top of the REST APIs anyway. So, yeah. While we're here, one other thing to keep in mind is we do have build specs for each of these code build jobs. So they will all be slightly different. Our build specs for the later environments, because these are all deployments, you're probably going to use the same build spec actual file, but keep in mind that your code build job will actually be running a build spec for each of these. Whereas for something like Jenkins uses a single job to do its pipelines, which is a little bit different. All right, so something else to consider is our approval gates. So we don't obviously want to be deploying straight from a stage environment to our production environment. So we probably want to have some kind of a integration test in here. So you can put that in as a code build job. You can also put in a manual intervention step if you want, as I was mentioning before. Or if you do have a large business that you do want to specifically have a manual action to do your deployments, there's no reason why you can't separate this out into a separate code pipeline. So at the end of your process, you deploy into a particular branch, and then you do a pull request from that branch into, for instance, your production branch, and that production branch then would run through and deploy into production. So you can separate jobs like that. So just keep that in mind when you're building. So Igor asked, how do you keep secrets in AWS and MuleSoft in sync? So that's a really good question. What I do is I use Secrets Manager in AWS. So Secrets Manager can store all of those secrets and encrypt them. You can then in your CodeBuild pull out that from Secrets Manager and push it straight into your properties. If you have a look at the example that I give a bit later, it shows how to do that. It's pretty simple though. Sorry, Daniel, for stealing your job. All right, so in general, that's all great. We normally would run an application through, but generally what you want to do is you want to deploy a group of APIs together because it makes logical sense, and you can then actually do your integration tests across those. So what I would normally do is you can have your code pipeline and it can in parallel run all of your build steps, so your Maven installs. It can then in parallel do all of your deployments. So you can end up with your build going end to end pretty quick between all of your environments. I think for us, these deploy steps are really only taking about 7 minutes to execute, to do a complete deployment. So yeah, keep in mind that these jobs can be in parallel or in sequence. All right. So now I'll give you a look at what it actually looks like. So this is AWS. I'm sure you guys have probably seen this before. So if you have a look into CodePipeline, this is my example application, and I've provided the code base for this, so you can have a bit of a poke around and build it in your own account if you want. So if we go into this pipeline, so you can see I'm building from a source. So that's using 2 GitHub repositories. And we're running our build job here. So this is just a CodeBuild job that we're running. So if we open that CodeBuild job up, you can see there's a whole lot of things that it's executing. And essentially, as I was saying before, it's a sequence. So it builds up a container and it runs a sequence of shell commands, essentially, on that container. So you can see here, I'm setting up my Maven settings so that I can hook back into my Maven repository. We're building and cleaning our environment. And then you can see I'm doing a Maven verify, which is basically the same as a Maven install. So it's generating a jar file. And at the end, we see we've got our jar file, and then it uploads those artifacts. So our jar file into S3. So something else to have a quick look at is you can see here it also says uploading to S3 cache. So what that's actually done is when at the end of our build step, we grab all of our Maven repository that has been built in this container, and then it uploads that back into S3. So if you notice this time that it took to actually build this job, so it went from 7:14 to 7:34, so roughly 15 seconds to build that whole environment. Now, look, this is the simplest project you could possibly get. It was just an example one, but what it really means is instead of spending 20 minutes downloading all of your dependencies for your build, you can just grab what you grabbed last time and continue from there. And any new libraries would then get downloaded on top of that. So it's very handy, and strongly recommend using caching everywhere if you can. So when we've done our build, if we go back to our pipeline, you can see the next step that it will go through is it will deploy to Sandbox, and then it will deploy to prod. And you can see when we deploy to prod, there's a review stage where you can do a manual approval of, yes, I have ensured this is tested. And then go approve on that. And so that means that you can have that really easy manual gate if you need to. Obviously, I'd recommend, if you can, putting together a suite of integration tests and having it all automated and going through. This will depend a lot on your business though, really. So we'll quickly have a look at that deployment job. So our deploy job is pretty similar. So it's running a set of steps. The only difference here is that we're using the Anypoint CLI here. And if we go through, it runs the CLI and it checks to see if the environment's there, the application's being deployed. And if it hasn't been deployed, or if the GitHub SHA has changed, then it will go, all right, clearly I need to do a deployment now. So that's what's happened in this particular case. The GitHub SHA has changed and it's got to do a deployment. So that's basically till here. So it's completed its deployment at this point. And then after that, what I'm doing is checking to see that the application has been successfully deployed. So it's really important to make sure that you actually see us started, because if the Mulesoft application hasn't been deployed, it could be in some kind of intermediate state. And you really want to make sure that when you start running your integration tests, that everything's stable, you're all fixed. Yeah, so, and again, that then uploads to our S3 cache. So I'll go in and show a bit more detail about this S3 cache as well for this particular job a bit later. All right, so by the way, if you have any questions as we go through, you're welcome to ask questions in the chat. Right, so I'll continue on here. So I'll just talk about what's in a build spec. So these build specs are really describing what our code build job is going to do. So this example is actually the build job that we were looking at just before. So what a build spec really does is it's accepting some kind of artifact. In this case, it's accepting source, but it could be accepting a jar file that you've previously built, or essentially anything. And then you can apply environment variables over the top. So you can push in any environment variables from your pipeline or from your actual build job. And then it's going to run through a set of phases. So I think there's 5 different phases. In this case, we're using a pre-build phase, a build, and a post-build. And really those phases don't have any particular meaning apart from giving you a bit of context about what stage you're at. And you can see what stage it is in the UI in CodePipeline. And at the end of the process, out of your CodeBuild job, you'll get an artifact, and you'll also push into a cache. So you remember before when I was speaking about the Maven repository? So this is what actually does that. So it's picking up our Maven root directory, and it's throwing all of that into our cache. And then the next time the job runs, as long as this job's been successful, it will pick up that cache and run through using that newly updated cache of our Maven repository. So environment variables. So they can come from either secrets manager, parameter store, or the code build job, or the pipeline. So you can really pull in a lot of information from a lot of different places. So we store all of the client ID, client secret type of information in secrets manager. You can use parameter store to do that sort of stuff as well. But yeah, look, definitely keep it out of your Git repos, because you don't want to have, pollution of secrets in there. And then it's just running really a set of shell commands, and all this should look pretty similar to anyone who runs bash commands and that sort of stuff. And then, you can pretty much run anything. So this is running just Maven. Few times caching is really key. So this is showing the way that caching works for the deploy step. So it's looking at our deploy shards, and then if is not started, or if it's an old version, it will then do a deployment. But otherwise, it doesn't need to. So that can really save a lot.
Daniel, are you there, mate? I'm not sure if it was just me, but I think we've lost Julian. Might just give him a minute or two. I know he was getting towards the end of his presentation. Might just give him a minute to see if Julian can log back in.
Yep.
He did mention he was having some connectivity issues today, and I didn't want to jinx it, so I didn't say anything about it, but we were hoping that it would come good. Looks like he's coming back now.
I'll quickly make him a host.
We're back?
Yep.
We're back.
We're back. Hey.
Right. Sorry about that. Did we get up to the tips and tricks?
Yeah, we were talking about caching, where we sort of started. It started to break up a little bit, and then we lost you. So.
Yeah, sorry. I've been having internet problems all day.
No worries.
Right. Yeah, this caching, it's really checking to see our GitHub hash, and if that changes, or if our deployment has not been successful, it will perform our deployment here. So really the way this is doing it is it's by pushing a file in with our SHA, and it's caching that file, and because that file will show that it's been a successful build, So the cache only ever gets updated on a successful build. So we know for sure that next time we run, that cache file we can use to just check. And so we're not rerunning. So yeah, keep in mind that like anytime we're running these jobs, essentially we're getting charged for them. So is copy of your build. This
Lost him again.
Yeah, it looks like we've lost him again.
Okay, yeah, I heard that.
Unfortunately.
Okay, let's see whether he comes back. We'll see how we maybe continue with the next one, but I think he should be back in a minute.
Yeah, we might just give it 1 minute and see if we can do one last crack. Otherwise, yeah, we might hand over to you next, Daniel. I suppose there are a lot of advantages and a lot of positives in a virtual meetup in terms of we can have this geographical reach, and you know, you can do it from your home or your office or wherever you are. But yeah, when connectivity gets in the way, it can cause a few issues. So
yeah, actually, the next meetup in June, you mentioned that earlier, that we're planning the next one in June. We're actually planning to run that in person again in Melbourne. So hopefully, if we do that, and it looks quite likely, we'll be able to reunite in person again. I think the worst thing that can go bad there is that the beer gets warm, but apart from that,
we'll make sure it's nice and cold.
That's right. Right, Julian, we see you back. No, ouch. Okay.
All right. I think, Daniel, probably in the interest of time, did you want to cover off your next session now? And then if Julian sort of gets his connectivity issue, we might cross back to him maybe afterwards if we've got a bit of time before the quiz.
Yeah, he's actually on.
He's on, is he?
Yeah, I see him on. Okay, yeah, I see him is on, but it's probably still connectivity issues. So I guess in that case, I'll probably quickly step in and we can hand over to Julian later on, just in the interest of time, given it's already late in the day. Let's do that then. I will quickly present my screen here. Hope you can see that.
All good.
Good, fantastic. Okay, cool. Well, thank you. So what I'll do over the next, 25 minutes or so, and again, I promise we'll give Julian the last word as well once he's back. What I want to do is today talk a little bit about Anypoint Runtime Fabric, a deployment model that's been out for almost 2.5 years or so. But recently we introduced support for EKS. So I quickly wanted to talk about this. Also show a demo if time permits. But let's get started first. So first of all, what is Anypoint Runtime Fabric? So as you know, we support at MuleSoft, we support different deployment models for our Mule runtime. We support Cloud Hub, which a lot of you are probably using in your environment, which is the SaaS-based or PaaS-based platform. We support Mule on-prem or self-managed, so you can run it on a server or in a virtual machine. And in late 2018, we introduced Anypoint Runtime Fabric, which is essentially the containerized version of our platform. So what we do is essentially combining the benefits of the Mule runtime with Kubernetes, essentially, right? Because we got a lot of questions from customers, from partners. Do you support containers or Kubernetes? And Runtime Fabric is the answer. So you can run multiple versions in the same Runtime Fabric, which you can't do when you run it on a server. So the server always uses the same runtime version. You can scale horizontally redeploy with zero downtime. again, using the Kubernetes functions for that. And you can easily manage it exactly like you manage your Cloud Hub environments, or your on-prem environments. You can manage your Runtime Fabric environments in the control plane as well. So essentially what happens is, and you can see that here when we combine or compare the deployment models, Cloud Hub, essentially it's deployed in the cloud, is managed by MuleSoft as well. The only thing you need to do is deploy your applications. When you go with on-prem or self-managed, the control plane, all the design tools are still managed by MuleSoft, but you manage the runtimes yourself. And the same thing happens with Anypoint Runtime Fabric. Control plane is managed by us, and the actual appliance, meaning the Kubernetes distribution together with the worker nodes, that is something that you as a customer or as a partner are managing. So it gives you flexibility, it gives you more control over your environment, obviously, but at the same time gives you more flexibility around scaling up and down. So we rolled that out back in 2018, and that's here on the left-hand side. We essentially started to deploy it across private clouds. So we had support for Amazon and for Azure, but you needed to deploy it inside of a VM. So if you wanted to deploy Runtime Fabric, for example, on AWS, it had to be on EC2. You needed to have a VM on EC2, essentially just with an operating system, and we installed Kubernetes and Runtime Fabric inside of it. Runtime Fabric has turned out to be quite a success for MuleSoft and for customers, but the feedback we always got was, okay, we would like to use the Kubernetes capabilities of the public cloud providers. So things like EKS, GKE, or AKS. And that's what we started to support now. So that's essentially the second iteration of Runtime Fabric. Now you can run it inside of the managed Kubernetes services of those public cloud providers. And I will talk a little bit what that actually brings you as benefits. So going forward, and this is more future looking, so this is not current state, this is future looking. We will also introduce support for OpenShift, distributed Kubernetes workloads as well will be supported. And pretty much the future will be that any Kubernetes service that that our customers are using should support Runtime Fabric as well. So at the moment, we're at this point here. Oops. There you go. EKS, GKA, and AKS. I think at the moment we're only supporting EKS and AKS. GKE is on the immediate roadmap. Okay, so what is the difference between running Runtime Fabric on a VM or on bare metal as opposed to a managed Kubernetes provider? So the only thing you have to manage as a customer are the VMs, right? Regardless of where they're located, whether they're located in a public cloud provider or on-premise. You have to ensure that the different VMs that make up Runtime Fabric are connected in the network. So that's essentially infrastructure and VMs. That's what you're doing. What we install is the appliance and all the different components for Runtime Fabric, which includes the worker nodes and control nodes. Now, what has changed now with Runtime Fabric on EKS and AKS? Obviously, now Runtime Fabric is delivered to customers as a package of components that run on top of an existing EKS or AKS environment, right? So we assume you have an AWS environment, you have EKS or access to EKS on there, and you can spin up clusters on EKS pretty much to run with that. So it's essentially bring your own Kubernetes, right? And all of the goodness that Kubernetes comes with, things like ingress controller, external log forwarding, etc. That is something that you control, right? The only thing we put on top of that is now the Runtime Fabric services and the actual Mule deployment, so the Mule apps and the different runtimes. So this model gives you a lot more control over how you want to use Runtime Fabric and where do you want to deploy it on. So just a different view, going back, Runtime Fabric on VMs and bare metal. We install everything. Essentially, we install the worker nodes on which you're running your apps and your Mule runtimes. And we also install the controller nodes with agents, internal load balancers, etc. Right? Everything managed through a control plane. How does that look like on EKS and AKS? Again, the only thing that we install right now are the worker nodes, right? With your Mule apps and your Mule runtimes, and you're using EKS and AKS specific components for ingress controllers or for your agents to communicate with the apps in there. So all of that configuration has to be done on those managed Kubernetes servers. Now, this also means that if you go down that path, if you decide to use Runtime Fabric on EKS and AKS, that you would need people in your organization with Kubernetes skills. Those things like configuration of ingress controllers and log forwarding, that's something that you have to now do yourself, right? That's not coming with our product, right? On the other hand, you get a more lightweight version of Runtime Fabric, has less of a footprint, and you can really focus on running your Mule apps on your worker nodes. So these are sort of the benefits of Runtime Fabric on EKS or AKS. And again, these sort of benefits will very likely apply to other Kubernetes distributions as well that we're rolling out support for. So again, we make it more lightweight. We're replacing the controller nodes. Cost-wise, it can be a benefit. So AKS, for example, is provided by Azure at no cost. EKS charges, I think that was the status as of October last year, may have changed now, 10 cents per hour. Again, these are sort of the controller nodes or the capabilities that used to come with the Runtime Fabric controller nodes. It's more customizable to your organization's environment. So you can essentially choose your own ingress controller, log forwarding agents, and other capabilities that these managed Kubernetes providers give you. And of course, it comes with less overhead as well, right? They're highly available and managed by Amazon and Microsoft. And essentially, the footprint overall is a lot lower. Looking at the technical capabilities, let's go into a little bit more detail there as well. These are questions that we get quite a bit when talking about Runtime Fabric. Where the differences specifically. So Kubernetes and Docker. So on EKS and AKS, obviously you bring your own Kubernetes, and what we do at MuleSoft only supplying the Docker images for Runtime Fabric. With regards to the Linux distributions, taking into account that we use core capabilities of those public cloud providers, we support what they're supporting. Whereas if you install it on VMs or bare metal, we only support Red Hat, Enterprise Linux, and CentOS. Now, the next point is an important one, and probably one that you will be thinking about as well. Is auto-scaling supported or not? So we do support auto-scaling of nodes because that is something that is supported in the AWS and Azure settings, right? Node auto-scaling is obviously something that we do not support on-prem. However, something that we do not support at this point is replica auto-scaling, so going down essentially to the application level. But when it comes to nodes and you want to configure auto-scaling there, you can do that through Azure and AWS. Support for external log forwarding, again, that was included in the bare metal version of RTF. Now you can think about yourself what you're using. If you use, Splunk or others, now you can hook that into RTF and essentially manage log forwarders through that mechanism, right? So we're less prescriptive in that regard. Internal load balancers, that's something that was included in sort of the old version of RTF. By the way, the old version of RTF is still supported, of course. If you want to run it in your own VM or in your own servers, you can still do that. We're just giving you options now. But if you go with EKS and AKS, essentially you can bring your own internal load balancer. You have more control over that. Anypoint Security Edge is not supported yet at this point. Again, that's sort of an add-on capability that comes with things like web application firewalls. That was included in sort of the RTF on VMs and bare metal version. But because it includes the control plane, we were able to embed Anypoint Security Edge there. When it comes to EKS and AKS, and if you wanted to activate a firewall, for example, then you would have to do that in AWS itself. For those of you who worked with RTF on bare metal, you will know that we have a tool called Ops Center there that allows you to handle the operational side of things. Now, that's not included now. Again, you would be using the AWS and Azure specific components for that. And the maximum number of worker nodes now has increased. Now you get 30 instead of 16 that you get on VMs and bare metal. All right. I'm just going on to the next slide, which talks about this a little bit as well. So here are some of the limitations, but again, certain things have been improved actually. So the maximum number of nodes supported is 30. Node types, you have to use VM-based nodes. So if you spin up EKS, for example, under the cover, essentially you get EC2 instances. Fargate is something that we are not supporting at this point. The maximum number of replicas that can be deployed per node is 40. So for those of you not familiar with Runtime Fabric, so essentially replicas, almost like sort of applications or containers that are running inside of a node. Maximum there is 40. Now, it is recommended that you run more about 20 to 25 to get the necessary headroom available in a node. But the absolute maximum would be 40. If that's something that you're interested in actually for your organization, please feel free to reach out to Adam or myself. Can certainly help you with sizing or solutioning these types of activities. You can define environments inside of a runtime fabric. Maximum there's 50. The maximum number of runtime fabrics you can create within a business group is also 50. So it can really sort of scale quite flexibly there. Object store, something currently not supported for runtime fabric clusters. So that's one of the limitations. Again, if you need persistence there, I would look at native capabilities in AWS instead. And currently, we're supporting Kubernetes versions 1.16 to 1.18. Okay, awesome. Right, live demo. So we've got a GKE for RTF now has been released. Thanks for sharing that, Royston. Yeah, that's out now. That has definitely moved on from the roadmap. So I want to show a quick live demo. How that actually works. What's the timing? 1828. That's fine. So what I want to do now is actually do a live installation of Runtime Fabric on my EKS environment. I've got an EKS environment right here. A cluster that I set up with 2 nodes in total. So that's running, and currently these are empty. So let me just quickly switch over here. So something that we're doing is when you install Runtime Fabric and when you do sort of remote management, we offer a tool called RTF CTL or Runtime Fabric Control. And that allows you essentially to manage your Runtime Fabric environment through a command line interface as well. But normally the way you would do that is essentially through our normal control plane. But you've got different options here. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going into my Anypoint environment. And what I will do first is go into my Runtime Manager. So for those of you who've worked already with the Anypoint control plane and you go into Runtime Manager, you will see here, apart from the applications and servers, that you have here a option Runtime Fabrics. And this is where you essentially can create a runtime fabric. So once you install that on-prem, you have to create the runtime fabric, then run the necessary tools on your server or on your EC2 instance, for example, to create that. Now, with EKS, it's a lot easier, thankfully. It's a good thing. So what we're doing is here, we go on, create runtime fabric. Now you've got the options here where you want to deploy it, VMs or bare metal, or one of the three public cloud providers. So I'm picking EKS. And I have to pick a name. And to show that we're not working with anything that's been sort of pre-installed, let's check the time. It's 18:31. So I'll put that into the name as well. All right. Again, support responsibility has a bit of implications there, obviously, given that there's a lot of infrastructure that you're now providing, right? Okay, so what we've done now is we created a runtime fabric, and it now has to be obviously installed on the EKS environment and activated here in Runtime Manager. The way you do that is through that command line tool, right? You use RTF-CTL. And first of all, what you want to do is validate your environment. You want to validate or check. And I'm actually connected now, obviously, to the EKS environment through the through a prompt. First of all, I want to check whether the target environment is actually suitable to install Runtime Fabric. So I just do this very simply by taking this activation code, right, that you get when you create a new Runtime Fabric. So I copy this and I run this command RTF-CTL validate with the code. Now it connects to my EKS environment. And it essentially checks, so here I had an old namespace installed. It essentially goes through a checklist around CPU capacity, memory capacity, to check whether the target environment is actually suitable to install Runtime Fabric or not. That takes a few seconds. Okay, so all validations are successful. Proceed with installation, so we can go ahead with that. So I'm running the same command now again, RTF control, but this time I say install, and I provide that validation code again. So now what's happening is we're installing Runtime Fabric on my target EKS environment. It creates, for those of you who are familiar with Kubernetes, it creates namespaces, security policies, service accounts, cluster roles, etc., etc. All essentially using the RTF control function plus the activation code that we provided. So that could take a bit. Let's wait a moment. I'm just checking on questions here. RTF is not available for trial. Yes, it is. So if you speak to your MuleSoft representative for your company, you could actually get a 30-day trial license for RTF if you wanted to try that out. So Runtime Fabric is ready now. That's fine. So now, obviously, what we have to do, we talked about licenses. We have to now apply a license file. I've got that locally here, a Mule license file right here. What I need to do, first of all, is to base 64 code it, right? and then run another RTF control script that applies that particular Mule license to my installation. Okay, cool. Now we got that because, of course, we want to be in compliance. So now we're going back to the runtime plan. And as you can see here, what has happened while I was installing this, this runtime fabric that I created is now gone from, what did it say, being activated to active, right? It specifies the version of runtime fabric. It also specifies the Kubernetes version. It specifies where it is installed. So in this case on EKS, and it does a real-life health check. So that's good. The only thing we need to do now before we install any sort of Mule applications, we want to associate environments with it. All right. So by default, the AnyPoint environment comes with very different environments: design, production, sandbox. Now we need to specify which ones are we using. In this case, I decided to go with the sandbox one. You may have a different runtime fabric for production and another different one for your design. So what's happening now is when we go into this overview page, you see your runtime fabric there. You would see your list of runtime fabrics if you have more than one for design, sandbox, and production. And it tells you the status as well. So now I can just go ahead, essentially, when I want to install an application or deploy one. Let's say I have a simple Hello World application here. Now when I click on deployment target, for those of you on Cloud Hub, this looks familiar. You can select Cloud Hub, but now you can also decide to deploy it on your runtime fabric. I have a sort of a sample file here that I can load up here. Now, obviously, here now you get a lot more parameters that you can work on. Things like runtime version, replicas is something that you would get, but especially runtime version you get in Cloud Hub as well. Obviously, now what's missing is things like the region that you want to deploy to, right? Obviously, because that's already predefined to where you're running EKS. But where it's getting really interesting now is if you're familiar with Kubernetes, you can get a lot more fine-grained now with the reserved CPU or memory that you want to allocate to your app, or the so-called CPU limit that you want to define, right? As you know, in Cloud Hub, it's a bit more limited. You can put in 0.1, 0.2, 1.0, etc. When you're using Kubernetes, you can go a lot more fine-grained, and this is something that you can use here. You can define the deployment model, whether you want to use rolling update or recreate. Again, for those of you familiar with Kubernetes, that will look familiar. And of course, ingress is important now, right? If that is an externally facing API, you want to define your ingress controller and you want to enable inbound traffic. Now, that's not going through Runtime Fabric now. That is going now through EKS. Now, I haven't configured that in my EKS environment. That's why I can deploy this application, but I unfortunately can't test it. But again, I wanted to show you what would be involved in actually running and deploying that, right? You get your properties, your JVM parameters, etc., etc. That's okay. It's jumped over there now. So now you can see essentially all of your applications, including the ones that run on Runtime Fabric. Okay, cool. That's pretty much all I wanted to show. Questions in the chat. Is there any differences between replicas of RTF versus workers of Cloud Hub? Yeah, conceptually they're different. Obviously they are in Runtime Fabric. You've got worker nodes with your workers, and they're essentially containers. So they've got altogether a different footprint than the worker nodes in Cloud Hub, which are EC2 based, right? So the main difference is worker nodes or workers in Cloud Hub are EC2 or VM based. whereas the workers in Runtime Fabric are container and Kubernetes based. So you get the additional sort of flexibility and infrastructure that you get with the Kubernetes environment. Okay, that was all that I had. Any other questions, please put them in the chat window and I can answer it there. Back to you, Adam.
Fantastic. Thanks, Daniel. Really appreciate that. Julian, have we got you there?
Yeah, yeah.
Looks like we got the connectivity back. I was just thinking we might cross back to you and you can sort of take the next 5 minutes or so just to close out your presentation. That's okay.
Cool. Yeah, I've prayed to the demo gods again. Let's hope
awesome.
we can continue. Yeah, so we just finished talking about caching and all that sort of stuff. And we'd gone through talking about build specs. And yeah, look, I think this one's a really key one. If you can keep your build specs pretty generic and only keep one copy of them and then push them in. So the way we're doing it is with Terraform, and we've got a directory full of them, and we just push them in. And those actually get applied directly on the CodeBuild job. So there's two ways of running this. So you can either have it directly on the CodeBuild, or you can do it via your Git repository. We've found that it's better to do it direct in general, because that way we don't need to worry about keeping those build specs during the next set of tasks. So there are plenty of variables to pull out with CodeBuild. So you can pull out the source version, like you could see I was doing with our deployment steps. You can pull out the source directories of your inbound artifacts. You can also grab the build number of your CodeBuild job and who actually started that job. And as part of the scripts that I'll share with you, you can also grab the project name, which is essentially the Mule application for our case, and our environment as well, which is really your stage that you're deploying to. Yeah, some other really cool things is in your CodeBuild job, you can actually specify your secrets manager places that you're going to pull stuff out of. And within that, you can actually use environment variables. So it means that you can pass in environment variables for your pipeline environment, like I'm showing here. And that will automatically go to the correct secrets manager for that environment, which really simplifies your build scripts. So this is something that's really been painful for us from time to time. So your approval actions have to happen within 7 days for AWS. So yeah, if it's longer than that, it actually expires. So you can ask AWS to increase that limit, but I'd probably suggest if you do have approvals that are going to take longer than 7 days, you probably should be working it through your Git repository and pushing to a branch and then picking up. Voices. Okay, so the internet connection's not great still, I guess. One probably last thing I think is rolling back isn't really part of the code pipeline. So there's no facility to roll back. You've really got to roll forward on any changes you make, which means that if you're going to be trying to roll back something, you need to do a revert commit. So yeah, it's just a bit of a difference with way of thinking of things, but it really actually is probably a good thing because it allows you to show a full history of what's happened. So if you're going to want to start playing around with this stuff and want to have a quick sort of get going, if you go to GitHub and then grab this Intelematics public Mule. So there's a whole lot of instructions that I put together with how to do this and how to pull in your CodeBuild and CodePipeline. So this is all using TerraGrunt to run. So it's all Terraform code and then TerraGrunt to just get you going. Yeah, feel free to let me know what you think of it and have a play around. So thanks. That's it.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Julian. that was fantastic. Really appreciate that. I know it's hard when you're having some connectivity issues as well, and it was, you know, we had to circle back, but yeah, really appreciate you taking the time to share that with us tonight. It was, yeah, fantastic.
There was a question about, are there benefits using S3 to store artifacts versus a tool like Nexus? So by default, CodeBuild and CodePipeline always stores to S3. So to do things like releases, you would still use Nexus. So it will store the jar in S3, but then you can also perform your release and upload to Nexus. So both, I guess.
Fantastic. All right. Well, yeah, feel free to address any questions that come through. What we might do now is, in the interest of time, move on to, I won't say the main event, but the giveaway portion of the evening with the quiz. So this is really to test your knowledge, to ensure that everyone's been paying attention. I'm sure you have been. What we're going to actually do is run a Kahoot quiz. So a few points about Kahoot. First of all, there are prizes to be won, so put your best foot forward. If you've got a mobile phone handy, it's probably the easiest way to do it. You can also do it on your desktop if you've got a desktop there, but then you're sort of looking at two different screens, I guess. So open kahoot.it on the web browser on your mobile phone if you can, and I will give you a code shortly that will allow you to log into our particular game or quiz, if you like, for the Melbourne Meetup. Now, what's really important, if you would like to win a prize, please use your real name. It makes it a lot easier for us to try and contact you after the event and let you know what you've actually won. And in terms of the prizes, or what we've got on offer this evening, we've got 3 great prizes. So for the first prize, we'll actually have a training voucher for Mulesoft training, which is yeah, definitely worth your while. We also have a hoodie for second place and a t-shirt for third as well. So some good Mulesoft swag up for grabs, as well as some training. So yeah, as I said, please put your best foot forward. In terms of how the game is played, each question will be presented on the screen. You'll have 4 options, and it's a matter of choosing the correct option, and you get more points if you're correct and you are quick to answer. So keep that in mind as well. Okay, bear with me a second and I'll kick this off. Let's go. Classic here. So everyone, if you just want to jump on www.kahoot.it, let me turn off this ridiculous music that we have to do every time. Okay, so when you go to kahoot.it, enter that game pin 872885, and I'll quickly work that in the chat. And please use your real name. Yeah, we've got a whole bunch of people coming through now, which is great. Awesome, we're up to 26. Just give you a couple more minutes to get the last ones through. All right. It looks like we've got 10 people who haven't joined, down to 9. Thanks, Sharon. I'll give the last couple a minute. Keeping in mind, I suppose, Royson and Daniel, myself, probably Julian won't be joining, but yeah, there might be a couple more that still want to join. All right, last chance. Otherwise, we're moving on. All right, let's get into it. Now, a couple of things to notice. There will be some content related to MuleSoft specifically. Some will be general knowledge questions. Some will be based on what you've seen tonight. So hopefully it's an even playing field for all of you out there. Now, this is a bit of a warm-up. is really to test if you know what you're doing. Are you ready for this quiz? So click either the red, the blue, the yellow, or the green, and see how we go. Got 25 answers, almost there. 28. Okay, so that was really just a warm up. Everyone gets a point for that one. Yeah, I will try and hurry up. Sorry, I know everyone wants to get out of here. They've got other things to do. All right, fantastic. Now into the real stuff. Vivian, quickest to answer. So you can see there's points for being fast, and you know, trigger happy fingers are the way to go. All right, question 2. What is the maximum supported number of nodes when running Runtime Fabric on EKS or AKS? 10, 20, 30, or 40? Daniel mentioned this, I think, 3 or 4 times. He did a really good job. I paid attention. So yeah, hopefully you were listening for this one. Maximum supported number of nodes. Correct answer is 30. So 8 of you got that correct, which is good. So keep in mind that number. I know there was a few metrics in that presentation, but yeah, the correct answer is 30 for that one. All right, Kunal Kapoor, moving into first place. Okay, question 3. What natural disaster has caused havoc across New South Wales and Queensland this week? Very much an Australian-based thing. If you've been paying attention to the news, it's been everywhere here in Melbourne for the news and across Australia. Been very devastating, actually. So yeah, thoughts to the people who have experienced that. Flood, that is correct. Had a lot of rainfall and a lot of rivers have overflowed. So good news is I think the weather's turning.
Get those 4 in a day, right?
Exactly. That's just standard here. Good call. Nana Akpan, highest answer streak, 3 in a row. It's on fire. Okay. All right, true or false? This is easy. Node auto scaling is supported with RTF on EKS or AKS. True or false? Was mentioned in Daniel's talk as well. 23 were correct with true. This is supported. Good job. We've got a new leader. I'm liking this, keeping everyone on their toes. Good job, everyone. We're getting some high scores here, so lots of people are getting these correct, which is great. All right, question 5. According to ARIA, what is the best-selling album in Australia of all time? Bat Out of Hell by Meatloaf, Whispering Jack, John Farnham, Greatest Hits from ABBA, or Come On Over by Shania Twain. I had to put a music one in there. Not many of these are good answers, I must say. But Meatloaf is the correct answer. I think I was talking to Daniel about this during the week. I actually looked it up. I think it was 25 times platinum or something. It went, sold so many copies in Australia. So I think that sort of ARIA have been using you know, those metrics since 1970 or something. So yeah, we'll leave it there. If anyone actually saw his performance at the AFL Grand Final, I don't know how he sold so many albums, but anyway, let's move on. Okay, Mana Akpan back in the lead. All right, who's going to end up on the podium, guys? Need some more winners here. Where does CodePipeline store its artifacts? Julian mentioned this a number of times. It was come up in some questions as well. Code commit, S3, your own Git repository, or AWS CodeBuild are the answers there. S3, yeah, lots of correct answers there. That is correct. Ooh, we've got some others that are challenging. I like it. Okay, we can beat Anna. Question 7. What is cynophobia a fear of? Open water, heights, clowns, or dogs? This was something I learned, by the way. I wasn't aware of this. So we're always learning here, which is good. 3 seconds. Correct answer is actually dogs. Yeah, I hadn't heard of that one before. So if anyone has a fear of dogs, looks like 3 people might have known that or guessed correctly. But yeah, clowns is actually, there's another name for that. I saw that while I was doing the research myself, actually. I've got a friend who has a fear of clowns, which makes me laugh every time. All right, not many changes at the top there. Victor is the highest climber though, so look out for Victor, he's storming home. What tools could I use to deploy a Mule application with CodeBuild? Now, what's the best answer here? Okay. You got to pick the best answer. It's an important one. All of the above. So it's a little bit harsh because you can use Maven, you can use Anypoint CLI, and you can use REST API calls, but you can use all of those as options, which Julian went through in one of his presentation slides there. I think it was one of the icons popped up that sort of listed those, and he talked through those options as well. Okay, Anchor has hit the lead. And Tony is the highest climber. Everyone's pushing for a podium finish here. Okay, question 9. What is the surname of the family on Ozark? If anyone's watched the Netflix series, is it Bird, Snell, Bluth, or Navarro? Had to do something to do with Netflix. Knew everyone was spending a lot of time at home over the last 12 or 18 months, or probably still are. You know, streaming's gone through the roof. If anyone's watched Ozark, great show, highly recommend it. Bird is the correct answer. So most people got that right, which is good. Again, a bit left field. All about versatility here. Kunal Kapoor back in front. Okay. Rakesh is up 9 places. All right, last question. If your CI/CD process is slowed, what's the first thing you should do to improve performance? Look at your connection speed from AWS, caching, running parallel code pipelines, or increasing the size of your CodeBuild instances. I think we tried to cover this 3 times, this particular slide. So yeah, 21, got it right, that's fantastic. It's all about caching. Julian was big on that, so I hope that point came across. All right, the moment of truth, everyone. Here we go. Podium finish time. In 3rd place, Amit Ray, well done. 7 out of 10. Vivian as well. And the quickest fingers on top, number 1 is Kunal Kapoor. Congratulations. So well done to everyone. We've got some runners up there, Anchor and Mana. You know, we're at the top for most of the way. So congratulations to the winners. Yeah, we'll take those details. Daniel, if you want to take a screenshot of that, or I'll have it there somewhere. If you haven't got that, just so we can make note of the winners, or I should actually have access to this anyway. So congratulations, guys. We'll get those prizes out to you very shortly. So I hope that was a bit of fun. Now let me jump back here. And that's all there is for this evening. So look, really appreciate everyone joining this evening. I know you've got your own jobs to do. We do value your input, your questions, and I hope that you found the content really useful. So again, please fill out the survey. We do really value your feedback, and we want to continually improve these sessions to better serve you as our community. And yeah, Daniel, were there any closing thoughts from your side?
No, all good. Thank you very much for attending. We always get a good crowd here, more than 50 people. So really, really thank you for that, given that it's sort of late in the day. And yeah, as said before, we're planning the next one in June, hopefully in person again, somewhere in the Melbourne CBD. Otherwise, we'll see you online in any shape or form. But thank you very much for attending.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you. And thanks, Julian, again, for your fantastic presentation.
Yeah, great
Really
point. Thanks again, Julian. Appreciate it.
Sorry about the internet connection.
No, all good. It was good. Thank you. Bye-bye.
We're good. Bye.